Thank you, each of you, for joining us. This is, going to continue some of the themes that were discussed this morning, that Pepper and I discussed around the economy. We're going to ask questions: what is the economy from the Catholic social thought perspective? How do we think the economy aligns or misaligns with that perspective? And what are some of the ways we could make it more closely aligned? And so I'm Peter Copeland. I work for the McDonald-Laurier Institute, a public policy think tank based in Ottawa, and do domestic policy. And Tucker, to my immediate left, the postdoctoral fellow at Harvard's Human Flourishing program. And then we have to his left Myron Rogal, who coordinates the Office of Justice and Peace for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Saskatoon, where he works to apply Catholic social teaching, public life, social justice, and many other matters. And last but certainly not least, Renze Nauta, who is Program Director for Work and Economics at Cardus, one of our friendly think tanks in Canada, where he focuses on labor markets. He's published on disability policy, the dignity of work, which I'm sure we'll speak about a lot today, and the relationship really between economic policy and common good. And so, without further ado, I want to ask each of you to, in response to this question, what in your view is the economy from a Catholic social thought perspective, and how do you think the structure of our economy aligns or misaligns with it? And I could ask, but and I may, in fact, if I need to. We'll start with Renze.
I'll give it a start. All right. So, what is the economy from a Catholic social teaching perspective? I'd like to start just with the compendium of the social doctrine of the Church. So, if you haven't read it, it's a fantastic resource. It's 250 pages, but it's dense. And it goes through all of the, it's basically the summary of all the papal encyclicals that have been written on the social doctrine of the Church. And in that compendium, I'll say it again, compendium of the social doctrine of the Church, there are two chapters about economics. There's one called, I think it's just called Work, or Human Work, it's called Human Work, chapter 6, I think. And then the second one is Economic Life. And so I think that's how I start to approach economics from a Christian social thought, Catholic social teaching perspective, is to think about it as almost two halves of the same lens. I like to focus in, I think, on work, because if you read Pope John Paul II's encyclical Laborem Exercens, that's where I think he really gets into the purpose of the economy is the human person. And when we think about the economy, sometimes we think about it as a duality between labor and capital. Certainly that's been historically some of the conflicts that have taken place over the last 200 years on economics have been between labor and capital. Which one's going to take priority? Well, if there's one that's going to take priority, it's labor. And it's very clear. The Pope says if there's one side, it's labor. Why? Because labor are the human persons who are involved in that. And if we think about what labor does in the economy, or what we do as workers, when we all go to the office, or we all go to the work site, what are we doing on a daily basis? When we go to the service counter, wherever we are in the economy, what are we doing? Is we're taking whatever time we have, 40 hours a week, whatever it might be, we're taking our time and we're taking our talents, and we're putting them at the service of others, ultimately. And what is that? It's the common good. So I think, when I think of work, and our participation in work and the way most of us participate in the economy on a daily basis, it's precisely that. It's we're taking our gifts, which include our time and our talents and other resources that we have, and we're putting them at the service of others. And people are recognizing that, and they're saying, through the exchange that takes place in an economy, I value that, and I'm willing to compensate you for that. So it's the primary way, it's one of, not the primary, it is one of the primary ways that we as individuals contribute to the common good of our society. It is not the only way, though. I think that the other ways in which we contribute to the common good are through our family life, as fathers and mothers and husbands and wives. We all we're there to support each other in a different context, in family, or in our church communities. We're there to worship together, and in all of these different institutions of society, we're there to also contribute to the common good. And in that respect, the economy is there to support that. So I want to be clear, I think, in saying that our work contributes to the common good directly, but it also contributes to it indirectly by supporting all these other aspects of society that contribute to the common good in different ways. And the economy lubricates that to make that happen. So I think that's where I'll start.
Yeah, that's very good, actually. And we'll come back to the question of whether our society aligns or misaligns with Catholic social thought and the economy, but I'd love to hear from each of you.
So perhaps I'll just elaborate on a few of the wonderful points you made and add a third. So at the service of the person, and just to kind of bring a couple of figures here to the conversation. So one was Hilaire Belloc, and he was a philosopher who really talked about something called distributism that Pope Leo XIII put out in Rerum Novarum. And that is a philosophy where really the service of the economy is indeed for that person, as Renze mentioned. And when that serves the person, then the common good is therefore served as a result. So Thomas Aquinas, you heard a lot this morning, talked about the universal destination of goods, and also implied is that is especially for those who are the weakest members or most vulnerable in society. So Gandhi put it this way: live simply so that others may live. So I would say as well that the economy at the service of the person is kind of twofold. It's to build that culture of life, work towards the common good, but also to save souls. And I'll just say a quote here from Peter Moran, who was involved with the Catholic worker movement, who kind of left us with this to ponder: going without luxuries in order to have essentials, he named. So that really when we participate in the economy well and in a holistic way that works towards the common good, especially serving the most vulnerable and the family unit, which you mentioned, that can really be building the kingdom of heaven here and now and working our way towards our final destination there. So in terms of, I'd also like to highlight St. Pope John Paul XXIII, Pacem in Terris. So just one quote from him in that document, that in society man's natural right gives rise to a corresponding duty in other men. The duty, that is, of recognizing and respecting that right. Every basic right draws its authoritative force from the natural law, which confers it and attaches it to its receptive duty. Hence, to claim one's own rights and ignore one's duties or only half fulfill them is like building a house with one hand and tearing it down with another. So this is especially where the common good and care for the most vulnerable connects. So that quote, tearing it down with the others, so Pope Francis famously alluded to that when he talks about how we can invest our funds sometimes out of ignorance and not knowing where our money is going, that it must go towards the common good. And G.K. Chesterton, who had a colorful way of putting things, says the effects of putting one's money in stocks and engaging in speculation when one cannot take responsibility for what another has done with his money can be devastating. So those are two of the ways in which the purposes for the economy from a Catholic perspective. The third I would propose is to build a peaceful society, and going back to Belloc here, who says that political freedom without economic freedom is almost worthless, and it's because the modern proletariat has one kind of freedom without the other. That is, its rebellion is now threatening the very structure of the modern world. So this morning, it was mentioned in a presentation that increasing gap between the rich and the poor, and how that there's many symptoms of that can destabilize a society. And so the third purpose for building an economy from a Catholic perspective would be from the perspective of peace building. So maybe end it there for now.
Very good. Thank you. Tyler, if you're good dad.
Yeah, at the risk of it becoming apparent very quickly who the least informed member of this panel is, I'm just going to literally and directly answer the question. with just like one distinction that I find helpful. So I think one thing you can mean by the economy is just like straight up people and their property as a system, in the same way as you have systems in physics with like thermodynamic properties or electromagnetic properties or whatever. Like an economic system is a bunch of people with properties, like ownership of stuff properties. And that's how economics usually treats it, like as an actual scientific discipline, as an investigation into like what happens when a bunch of people own stuff and you do stuff to that system. You could also mean by the economy like the sorts of things that my co-conversationalists have been talking about, where like it's a thing that we're all doing together. It's a group project that consists usually in primarily in like building something, technologies, cities, wonders, art, whatever it is that we're building together. Usually like not just one thing, but like a whole bunch of complex, multifaceted things. But it's a sort of like common activity insofar as each of our doing our own parts of it contributes to everyone else doing their own parts of it. So, you know, the people who like put the stones in the Sistine Chapel and the people who put the paint on it are supported by the people who sold the bread to those people, and they're supported by the people who grew the wheat for the bread maker. You get the idea. We're all like together, like doing a thing, which consists in building a thing, and that works itself out as what we call labor. So those are just two things you can mean by economy.
Very good. I will just round that out by doing quick etymology. Oiko nomos, the law of the household, and we were right to, I think, point to the higher principles to which the economy is in service of. But it is also about the efficient, effective, and just use of resources, right? The management of resources, both physical, and human, and so for those ends. So, with all of that in mind, I'm going to give a bit more contour to what I think some of the key principles, many of which you already mentioned, are features of Catholic social thought. And then I'd like to ask you to describe the political economy of Canada, the United States, and other Western democracies, and what you think some of the key features of them are that align or misalign with that picture. So. Generally speaking, I think Catholic social thought plays out in a more communitarian economics with an emphasis on private property, but for the universal destination of goods, which we heard earlier, a priority privilege for the poor and vulnerable, equality and dignity, but in a way that prioritizes certain institutions as like inviolable and central, such as the family. And other institutions, in fact, that they say must have a certain end and must be fulfilled and respected, and that the standards for a good life are somewhat objective and rooted in it can be understood by reason. So those are some starting points. Feel free to disagree or add some of those, but in light of what you've all said and that description, what do you think about Canada, the U.S., other Western political economies? How do they align or diverge from that? Should we go maybe in reverse order if that works? And feel free to chime in otherwise. If everyone works for me.
I mean, it would have been way more useful to just be able to repeat what they said, but there are a couple of, I guess. I'll just limit my comment to like a couple of things that I think we could be doing better. And I'll just back up to give this comment for context. One thing which I think is kind of like interesting about Catholicism is that lately like 50% of it is not like Catholicism, by which I mean this, like an enormous amount of what the church teaches is just like regular human common sense that the church has just like endorsed because it's regular human common sense. Like we call this the natural law. And a couple of dimensions of the natural law should, because they're not specifically Catholic, be the sort of thing that everyone could get on board with. Because they're just like dimensions, patterns in how human beings work, and always have worked and always will. One of those patterns is this thing that we call the universal destination of goods. It's this intuition, which, well, it's the law of God, but it manifests in us as an intuition that when we have stuff, it is okay. And it's okay on a couple of bases. First, because it's given to us for like the satisfaction of our needs. And second, because it's like distributable among us for various purposes to which we want to put it. And those two things have an order of priority in the order that I named them, such that you can't like distribute among you stuff that is already going to that first purpose. And that's a function of how those things were given to us, right? That, like, this is implemented by God insofar as stuff is given to us in order to satisfy our need, because that's the first, right? You can't do anything else if you haven't had your needs satisfied. And then to do the other stuff that you want to do with the stuff that you have. So here's one way in which we misalign with Catholic social teaching. We don't do that. Here's just like, this is a brief like pet point of mine because I wrote a paper on it. So apologies that this is a little bit self-serving, but I just think it's like something that people don't appreciate well enough sometimes. Like the distribution here, the order in which stuff goes to people who need it, and then from there to people who want to do stuff with it according to your own commonly settled upon norms of distribution, is not like a suggestion. It's like how property works, whether you think that's how it works or not. So if you have something that someone else needs, and you don't give it to them, and they can't get it anywhere else, it's not you not giving it to them. You can't give it to them. It's not yours. It's theirs. You just have it for some reason. Like you're holding on to it, but you don't own it, right? The natural law is a fact about how property is, not a fact about what you should do, first and foremost. It's, anyway. Well, it is, anyway. Here's a method. It's both, right? But it's a fact about what you should do because it's a fact about what property is. The second thing that I'll just note super briefly is that another one of these things that the Catholic Church has just always recognized, that doesn't even need to be specifically Catholic because it's just the way that humans have always worked, is that we have this concentric organization to our social structures. We've got the individual, and then families, and then communities, and then societies. And this is where like subsidiarity comes from. It's just this fact that we're like this. It's not even, again, it's not even first and foremost proscriptive. It is proscriptive, but because it's just descriptive of human nature, this is like how we work. It's just like straight up, like metaphysical, you are yourself. And then biological, we produce families. And then social, we have communities. And those communities work between the people that we know, and only after that between the people that we don't know. So here's another thing that we're not doing, is recognizing that. So.
Great points. Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately an empirical recognition of the ways we organize and are, which also entails prescriptions for, and when we don't manifest live by those principles, we kind of fall short.
So I'll start out with a couple more general comments, just to kind of help regroup the conversation here, and then go into some very focused examples, mostly in Canada with a few from the US and elsewhere. But to think of the economy for all is really a third way that is proposed for Catholics. So just to note that the Catholic Church doesn't support any particular model of economic development, such as capitalism or socialism and so forth. But for Catholics, it really is this way of distributing the wealth in a sense that the most amount of people as possible can have it in a manner that private property is a primary value. However, just in reading the recent encyclical from Pope Leo, he does mention that that is subordinate to the needs of the poor and most vulnerable, so it needs to be balanced up against that. So at the same time that the church would be opposed to say things like major corporate bailouts for corporations is almost that form of welfare to the corporations, they'd be opposed as well to excessive governmental bureaucracies that could cause an overreach into the life of the average citizen. So socialism, in a sense, is that would be for on one side of the spectrum that doing for, and raw capitalism would be kind of a raw kind of pulling up by your bootstraps mentality, but that also relies in a similar way on a sense of charity going out to save the other per se. So just a quote here from William Griffin, who says that both sides of the spectrum, left and right, are infected by increasing centralization of economic power. So the principle to mitigate this, of course, is subsidiarity, which you mentioned very well, Tucker. And so that kind of centralization of economic power, there's many examples we could point to across Canada and elsewhere how that is becoming a threat. But I want to just look at some of the kind of ways, very particular ways here in Canada where that could be improved on, and then some. Are we going to highlights a little bit?
Save that for.
Okay. So in Canada, I think it was mentioned this morning, this disparity between that gap between the rich and the poor. So this recent stats can, just have to find my numbers here for a second. So that it's grown, I believe, since 2025, that gap has grown significantly in Canada. So we also have in Canada also another area to note of concern are increasing patent laws, and this is also mentioned in the recent encyclical. So in Canada, we have sometimes proprietary protections for corporations which can then override private property rights. An example of this would be legal restrictions of the ability for farmers across Canada to service much of their own modern machinery. So there's also a decrease in economic agency that we can see when there's an increase in reliance on the state. And one example of this from Saskatchewan would be that in the last 3 consecutive provincial budgets, there's been record number of dollars spent on social services with a lower and lower delivery of services on that. And so there are some possible antidotes to that, but I'll get there a bit later. One which is especially problematic in Canada is corporate monopolies. So there are many, there's a lot of spotlight that's on that and many ways that are working to mitigate that, but it continues to be a problem. So if we contrast Canada in terms of some European nations and look, say, at something like the power grid system. So there's, in Canada, there seems to be an increased centralization. In some provinces, we've had programs in place that have been cut recently where, say, that either the corporation or the state, depending on who's in charge of power production in that province, would buy power back from the individuals who are producing it on their own property. But most of that has been eliminated, so there's a centralization of power that's happened there. Access to capital, we're doing many good things there, but that's of course one of those avenues or vehicles in which someone can be driven to a place where they can take some risks, create their own business, and create a better livelihood for themselves. And then a substantial one that I think is creeping up on us quite quickly is the decrease in accessibility to farmland and home ownership. So if you look at accessibility 2 generations ago, it was a place of income for most people. A generation ago already became a place of investment for those who have sufficient means, and sometimes those who are coming from even outside of Canada. And at present, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get into unless there's a long line of family wealth that is present. Home ownership is also more difficult as well for younger Canadians to get into. And of course, those are ways in which someone can exercise their right to participate in the economy through accessing those means of private property.
So I'm going to go back to the division that's in the compendium between work and economic life, which isn't to say work isn't part of economic life, of course it is, but it's kind of like the non-employment side of markets that the church wants to highlight. I think, and I'll use that division as a way to answer the question. So on the work side, I would say, if we step back and look at the Canadian economy overall, like we have complaints, we all have complaints, but we all, for the most part, have an ability to go out and earn some sort of income and contribute to the common good. That isn't true for all the people, though, and I think that's the point. So the first point is that they're overall, this is a land of opportunity, and we have many more opportunities in this country than we do in many other parts of the world to take our time and talent and put it to the service of others, as the church would like us to do. However, there are groups of people in our society that have great difficulty accessing the labor market. The first one I would point to would be people with disabilities. There are many workplaces out there that still don't accommodate very well the specific needs of people with disabilities, and that is a barrier. That is a barrier to their flourishing in the Canadian economy. And frankly, it's not as simple as just redistributing income to them, because there's so many non-financial benefits of work. It's the connection with the community. It's the ability to contribute to the common good in a way that only you can uniquely do. And so that's an aspect of it that we have to be aware of. Again, it's not simply about redistributing wealth, as important as that might be in some cases. Another group that I've done a lot of work on personally is people with criminal records. There are a lot of people coming out of prison, and as Christians, we believe that they no one is owed forgiveness, but we nonetheless have a religion of forgiveness and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. If they can't, and insofar as it's an injustice that they can't, that is also a barrier to their ability to flourish as human beings in the economy and participate in that way. There would be so many others, certainly Indigenous peoples, another area we've done some research on, that experience some barriers to participation in the labor market as well, and I could go down the list. So I think that despite the wealth that we have in this country, there are still those barriers on the work side. Now, on the economic life side, this would be our participation in the economy as consumers or as non-workers. So when we go out to the market, we're buying things. I think Myron already pointed out that there are monopolies and oligopolies out there that make life, they make life more difficult, sometimes, and more expensive. Home ownership is a huge issue I would point to, but there are also a whole bunch of areas where our markets are just not pointed toward the good, where they're actually pointed toward the bad, in some cases. So the gambling industry would be one that I would say. I don't think gambling is necessarily inherently evil, but the amount that people are gambling on these sites, and Cardus has done research to show exactly how much that is, and it's 3 times. By the way, the average amount someone spends on gambling in Ontario is 3 times what is considered safe by experts. That's an average, so you can imagine that there's some people who are doing way more. But that's an example of where I don't think that market is currently contributing to human flourishing. And there are others that prey on vulnerable people. And I think if there's one thing that we heard many things this morning, but the preferential option for the poor and making sure that it works for them is paramount. And there are so many examples where it doesn't. And then the maybe one overarching thing, another theme from this morning was measurement, how we measure the economy. And I forget if we're getting into this later, but we aren't meeting. Anyway, I'll just say this, and then go ahead. I'll start it now. But in our economic debate in this country, it's really all it's so much about the gross domestic product, and I think that's important because the gross domestic product is probably a measure of the tools that we have to lubricate the rest of our lives, if you want to think about it that way. But it does forget the rest of our lives sometimes when we focus on that exclusively. So that's another aspect where I think sometimes our economic debate is off kilter. So that's why I appreciated the discussion from the Flourishing Program this morning and Dr. Clunes. I think those are good starts to maybe shift back to a whole of life approach to economics.
Okay, so great points all. Can we talk a little bit more, specifically about trends? Let's say, like, how would you describe the trends that we've undergone in Canada, United States, Western world primarily, say in the past 100, 200 years with respect to political economy and how that, again, whether that aligns or misaligns, what are some of the things that are really salutary from Catholic social teaching perspective and which ones are not? Maybe Renze, we'll start with you. This is a curveball, but you can.
That's all good.
Sure.
Trends for the last 200 years. Someone said they were a historian this morning. I'm not, it was probably me. Well, I guess I would maybe try to answer it this way, which is that I think I'm glad you're here in the economy session. In some ways, it's the most important one. Obviously, I think so, as someone who runs an economics program. But I think the folks might agree with me on that. Obviously, the family is the fundamental unit of society, but Catholic social teaching got its start with an economic question. When in 1891, when Pope Leo XIII published Renze Nauta, and it was in response to the Industrial Revolution. It was and all the economic questions. And yes, how the economic questions were affecting other sectors of society as well. But it was really about how to reconcile labor and capital, and that division that exists in the economy, and was very apparent back then. And one of the first things, or fundamentally, Pope Leo's solution, if I can cut to the end of the encyclical, was labor unions. Was this mediating institution between the individual and the state? That if we just left everything to the individual, that weakens labor too much. But if we leave everything to the state, it also weakens the individual too much as well. And the solution was this mediating institution called labor unions. And I can't remember if it was in Rerum Novarum or in Quadragesimo Anno in 1931, but the Pope, who was Pius XI in the second one. Anyway, they also talk about employer associations, which is another mediating institution between a company and the state. This idea that we ought to have many different institutions in our society that all perform different functions. Labor unions to represent workers, employer associations to represent companies, also families and hospitals and all these things that each perform their own function. And that's the principle of subsidiarity. That's really saying that we ought to delegate as much authority and power to those organizations as we can, and only raise authority to the state when it's necessary, when those institutions aren't functional. So I guess, to get back to your question, what is the trend over the last 200 years? I guess the one key question for Catholic social teaching is, what's going on with those institutions? Are they getting stronger over the last 200 years, or are they getting weaker? I don't mean to be overly pessimistic all the time, and I'm not, but I would say that that's a worrisome trend. I'd say that many of the institutions that exist between the individual and state are getting weaker. I think our institutions are getting hollowed out sometimes. There's certainly a lack of trust. These institutions rely on trust, and there does seem to be, and I would also say that a factor of our institutions getting weaker is that individuals become more lonely, and there's increasing isolation, and I think we can see that right now. So that would be my worry about the trend.
Very good. I'll just make a quick comment and invite both of you to comment on it or my previous question, which is that the erosion of the mediating institutions, major phenomenon. And I think if you look back at, say, what Catholic social teaching prioritizes as the foundational value, which is the common good related to the flourishing of the person as conceived in the image of God. So, realizing that potential. Whereas both capitalism and socialism, kind of the different ends of the spectrum, in the last 150 years, they've been the dominant strands. They're both very similar in that because the foundational value in our society, following liberalism really, has become the individual. And so the individual whose good is conceived of as subjective, and the state increasingly must provide a lot of rights for the individual to pursue all of these things, which breaks apart the mediating institutions. And then so you have kind of the left saying that the state needs to get bigger and bigger to let the individual do whatever they want, and the right is more about maximizing the market choices and saying state institutions that provide for are actually reducing my individual freedom, which must be expressed above all else. And so this is just, I think it's a way of framing the issue from my perspective. So I'd be curious for your thoughts on that, or what you think the trends are.
So to bring both of those together in a way, so what I was going with this question is, who were the decision makers who have been kind of pushing some of the biggest trends? And these are trends that I'll say have principles at least instilled with them of Catholic social teaching, whether that was the intention of the individual or a group to do that or not. There are places where that can be visible. So kind of going back, just looking at my list here, probably about 70, 80 years, a lot of those trends and positive trends that were being pushed in Canada to expand principles of Catholic social teaching in the economy came from a collective sense. If I look over maybe the last 30 years or so here, those came from individuals who were pushing forward what they saw as an individual right, which may have great ability to kind of contribute to the common good, but it's still an individual who's bringing that forward. So when we look at kind of what's been happening over the last kind of in Canada, also the necessity of why those things happen, right? So if we look at access to capital, say as an example, during the Great Depression, when credit unions emerged as a form of local lending in Canada. Now we have some of the largest credit unions in Canada in the Western world, and it was in response to when banks were foreclosing on homesteads before the Homestead Act came into play, that groups of farmers came together and made these common lending institutions where you literally have the capacity to lend from one neighbor to another and to seek collateral through that kind of through that different way of having a banking system. So that came from a need of the wider community of something that was disrupting or poking at the common good. And yet a lot of the recent even positive things, as I mentioned, have came from more of a sense of individual rights. So I'm paraphrasing Pope Leo here in his, I just read this last night actually in the encyclical, but he was talking about how even if we add up all of the individual rights, that does not equal the common good. So he talks about that as a plus factor. So I would add that with lack of, or a decrease in the faith life of many Canadians and Americans too, for that matter, that there's more of a prevalence on individual rights, and then we see some of these more collective rights start to erode.
Very good. Brief comments from you, Tucker, before we go to final question and audience.
I guess I'll just simple-mindedly point out one of the really obvious, really more recent trends, which is the digital one, which is interesting because for one thing it messes with supply and demand a little bit insofar as digital products can be copied. They're not things, they're patterns of things, and you can just have a thing that is capable of receiving a bunch of patterns and just put the pattern in the thing. And it does whatever, whatever the coder who wrote the Word document that I'm using to process these things, that guy wrote the program. Okay, it was 1,000 guys over the course of a bunch of time. You get the point. That guy wrote some code that did a thing on that computer, and then he just decided that it's worth $150 or something, and just that because that's how much people will pay for it. But it doesn't cost him any more to sell 4,000 of those than it cost him to sell one. He just copies the thing again and again. So that's weird. Here's another thing that's weird about the digital technological revolution. It's a space. It's not primarily a thing that we have. It's a place where we do stuff. Like, we call it cyberspace. And there are like social media platforms. Like, platform is a place that you're on, and like media is a thing between you and other stuff. Right? These are like spatial metaphors. And one thing that's weird about that is that, you remember the thing that I said earlier about how we live in these like concentrically ordered communities? Well, like, that's determined by where you are relative to the other people. Well, there's a new way of measuring space now. It's not like where you physically are. It's like where you are on these things relative to the other people. And that's weird too, right? It means that you no longer, like, your economic input is no longer to your local community most of the time. And it means that your economic support is no longer from your local community most of the time. In fact, the vast majority of it comes from like giant systems that you'll never see and will never hear from and will like contribute to in this super anonymous way. Do I have any like helpful things to say about that? It's just, I suppose like what I want to point out in saying that is just that it's a weird way to live life. And I mean weird in like, in a sense that I hope is suggestive. Like, we are human beings who have a nature. And when stuff is weird for us, it's further from that nature. That's not to say we shouldn't be doing it, necessarily. Like, we have some agency over our choices and over the spaces that we put ourselves in, over the stuff we build. That's fine. It's not like I'm using a computer right now. But it's worth pointing out how far it is from, like, the original lives that we lived. Like, when Plato was probably not the first, but the first famous person to complain about technology. He was complaining about like music and writing and we were like, yeah, he's got kind of a point, because like these things shape how you think. Like, no longer can any old house slave go to the next town, hear a play once, come back and perform it for his master from memory, because everyone just remembers stuff that well. Now we write stuff, and we don't need to remember stuff, so we can't remember anything anymore. Oh no, that was Plato. Like, we are so far from that. So yeah.
Very suggestive point, and I think appropriately in light of the fact that we don't know exactly where things will go, and we do have agency to assert over these things. And so I want to take a few questions from the audience, but not keep you too long, just 5 minutes. But first, from each of you, just 30 seconds, one of the most important things to focus on that would have a remedial, positive impact on the state of our economy in light of Catholic socialist history.
Well, the theme of what I've said so far is about work, and I think a refocus on work, I think, is essential, especially in an era of AI. Sometimes you hear about AI is going to destroy a lot of jobs. That's probably true, but I do believe that a technological revolution just will change how we work. I don't think it'll eliminate work. But I think we have to be attuned to that, and I think the solution cannot be, as some Silicon Valley entrepreneurs would say, just, well, let's have machines and top 3% of the population work, and we'll just redistribute to everybody else. And I think that would be a disaster. So I think our politicians and policymakers need to be focused much more on what work means for the human person.
Very good.
I think to focus on local actors in the economy and that economic agency that they have to, some of the concepts of this out there would be the 100-mile diet, different aspects of that, and trying really to animate the local economy. Not that takes away elements of trade or anything like that, but but there's so many advantages to that, to the family unit on the conservation environmental side of things, to kind of reclaim what we've had at one point in time.
Yeah, I guess I'm just copying the Pope, but just be human.
Here. Very good. All right. Yeah. So if there are any questions, love to take a few. Yeah.
I'd go on. Role of philanthropy in economy, specifically, obviously from a Catholic perspective, but I'd love to hear some thoughts on how you see philanthropy, charitable giving, participating in a healthy Catholic economy.
Let's do what we did earlier and take a few. So I'll take two more. Yeah. Maybe you say your name too.
Gregory, I have actually two questions, but I think the one that I don't, it's not being really addressed, but maybe both are related. What about the living within your means? Because that's, I think, that key thing that's being fundamentally forgotten, especially now with the cost of necessities for life are much more expensive than the luxuries. And I'm wondering how does that also then play into how the problem of buying power being chopped in half in Canada, because like over the last 25 years. Because I was looking at how my parents were around my age and able to afford a home, but I can't because my buying power has been effectively chopped in half.
Great. One more. Yeah.
Sure. One of the issues that came up this morning was eradicating child poverty, and I want to make the record clear, I do oppose child poverty. But Tucker had an interesting piece in his presentation where he showed that, and again, you can clarify whether it's correlation and what the relationship is, but that children from financially distressed homes, if I recall correctly from the presentation, are more happy or satisfied in adulthood as compared to those who are not.
Great. So maybe we start. Yeah, that's one directly at you, Tucker.
Yeah, what exactly did I say?
By some degree of financial adversity is what I think it says.
Yeah.
So if you solve that,
with
you
sense
produce
of
a
meaning,
cohort of
it's really
adults who are not happy.
You what?
If you solve the problem, if you reduce financial distress for families, you then produce an adult population with less satisfaction and less happiness.
So complicated. So the finding that I mentioned was that financial difficulty in childhood, self-reported, correlates with sense of meaning in adulthood, which is one of the items on the index. Now, like, there are a couple plausible reasons why that might happen, but here's just like a broad umbrella for them. Like, when you overcome difficulty, that gives you a sense of life trajectory. That gives you a sense that your life has a pattern to it and a story. So, would giving those children more money ruin their sense of meaning later in life? Yeah, if you do it badly. Like, if you do it in a way that doesn't offer them another way to, like being poor when you're young forces you to have this like life narrative thing because you have a goal to get to. Like, it doesn't force you. Like, people can just, it's possible to just like roll over and accept that you're poor and never want to do anything about it. But like, most people don't, right? Most people have like aspirations, and most people, because our societies generally are way more mobile than they've been since like 200 years ago or whatever, can do that, and so they form that life narrative. So yeah, people need to have something by which they can do that. Yeah, I guess this is just a way of saying that, like, no, you don't automatically ruin that by giving children money, but if you're just giving children money and that's all that's happening, yeah.
Which is why UBI and some of these things that would eliminate work, which is a sense of purpose and striving, could be.
Yeah, in general, there are a couple other areas where this happens too, and financial difficulty in childhood is also correlated with other stuff like pro-social behaviors and like sense of community later in life, stuff like that. But like, yeah, the point is you need to have some kind of healthy adversity sometimes in order to have some of the goods that are constitutive of living a good life. It doesn't need to be poverty, but that is one that happens to correlate with our findings.
Okay, philanthropy and living within our means and purchasing power.
I'll take a stab at those. On philanthropy, I think charitable giving is good, obviously. But I think so. But the public policy issue that came up when you were talking was what is the role of the corporation? Like a corporation under Canadian law is it has a fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders, and that's right and just. A company is something that is supposed to offer product, good or a service, and then to earn a profit. The profit is good because it's an indication of stewardship. Stewardship is like
Using resources well.
But yes, for sure, using resources. I think we talked about that earlier. Anyway, using resources well and using the resources of the earth in the most effective way possible. So I think the profit is good, and that fiduciary responsibility is important. But it's always the problem with our economy is often that we forget the ultimate goal of something. The ultimate goal of a corporation is, like anything, to contribute to the common good. And so what are we then doing with that profit? I think, and if it is purely self-enrichment, that's problematic. Even if it's earning a profit, that's great. It's stewarding resources well. But then, what is it for? What is the ultimate goal? And that's where I think actually some countries have a better culture than us in terms of corporate giving and corporate philanthropy. And that's one I think where Canadians could do better on. And sometimes I think that. Okay, corporation is for profit, it's true, but when you say it too much, it reinforces that too much, and we forget that ultimate purpose. So that's what I would say on philanthropy. I would say, I don't know how much time we have now, but living within your means is similar, I think, in a way, in that it deals with stewardship. And there, I think, maybe it's related but quite different. I think, one of the things we talked about was our focus on GDP and economic success and everything, and that is important because, as I've said, it's the lubricant for a lot of other things that are good for us. But it can't be the sole focus, and because that's when your expectations of yourself economically get so high. It's suddenly, my father grew up with 5 siblings in a very small house in West Edmonton. That family now would need a house 4 times the size, and so sometimes it's the expectations that we have of ourselves as well that make our economy not possible to function. And then the expectations, and why? Because there's pressure from outside to show that wealth and I need more space and all that. Space is not a bad thing, but that's I think part of the problem is that we as a society are living within ourselves just because we have too high expectations compared to other parts of the world, compared to previous generations in our own country. I'll just leave it there.
I think just a couple of comments, Myron.
Sure. So just when looking at philanthropy, I'm thinking of St. Thomas Aquinas and its definition of sin. So judging whether something's a sin or not is intention, circumstance, and action, right? So that's always on behalf of the donor, and that's something that is really on their own conscience. But I do want to say a little bit on shareholder versus stakeholder, right? So that quote earlier from Pope Francis, building up with one hand, tearing down with another. So again, that's kind of that's back on the person, that judgment itself. But if you're investing in something that's destroying the culture of life, and it's very, very difficult now because our markets are very indexed, right? If you look into your own pension funds, you'll probably see some things that are destroying parts of the culture of life, and then you're reinvesting that in something that is good. Francis almost alludes to that as a cancellation of goods. So, but philanthropy is obviously necessary in for our culture and building up many of our institutions. And the affordability question, just a couple of practical avenues. So there's a couple of good groups out there. One is St. Vincent de Paul from a Catholic perspective, who really works with people in financial counseling one-on-one, and is not able to I mean, there's always those systemic challenges which you may be asking about that are keeping people in poverty no matter what. But there are certainly individual choices that can be made for people to improve their circumstances. And another one is Christians Against Poverty. So that they're not peddling any specific service, but they are helping and lifting hundreds of Canadians out of poverty each year just by helping them create budgets and live within their means.
Well, very good, thank you. We should wrap up now because we have limited time before our next session, but this was very rich. I want to thank each of you for joining us and sharing your thoughts, and thank you all for being here. Oh, sure.